main thing that we want to do today is how to map to ATT&CK framework from raw data. Let's first look at a few things, but before that let's do this. So use menti.com and with the code number 4597457 and answer the questions. So which of the following is not it should have been a procedure for external remote service. We talked about external remote service last time. It's technique number 1133 and you have three choices. One is stealing an employee's VPN credential and use that to access the network. Second is compromise a vulnerable web service to get a remote shell access. And third is phishing followed by a backdoor infection to obtain access. Okay, so this is going good. Few more. So stealing an employee's VPN credential and access is an example of external remote service as a technique for initial access, right? So we are talking about initial access. The second one, you want to compromise a vulnerable web service to get a remote shell access. This is also like last time we talked about a payroll service that was used to access. So this is kind of external remote service. But when you do phishing, your initial access is through phishing, right? So its initial access is not through external remote service. You may use external remote service later for further access, but your initial access is already done. So that is not an external remote service procedure. We talked about sticks. So what is sticks format used to communicate? Okay, so this is going well. All right, so that's sticks is for cyber threat intelligence, and we'll actually later in the course we'll actually look at the sticks format in detail, how sticks files are created for cyber threat intelligence. Now an attacker uses command injection to execute command on web server host. Which tactic is it? Is it initial access, reconnaissance, execution, and persistence? So in this case it is executing a command, so it's an execution, but it may also be initial access because that's probably how the attacker got into the system. So but execution is certainly the tactic. So certain behavior can actually have multiple tactics. That's something you have to look at. They might combine two tactics in one action, right? Okay, so you observe that one of your devices is establishing a TCP connection to a suspicious IP. What is the tactic? So if your device is establishing TCP connection to a suspicious IP, that means some unwanted executable is already executing inside your device, right? So that executable has executed, but we do not know whether it has established persistence, because persistence means that you establish yourself in such a way so that binary will be executed no matter whether you reboot your system or not, right? So if you just execute once doesn't mean that you are persistent. If you actually shut down your machine and restart, it may be gone, right? So it depends on whether it's so from this information we do not know whether the persistence has been established, but we know that it is communicating with some service somewhere which is a suspicious IP, probably there is a list of there is an abuse IPDB database where where we can look and see whether this IP has been listed as suspicious by somebody. Then I will say that it's command and control, right? Okay, this should be happening, but how do we check if command and control connections are happening? Okay, so command and control communication may use various types of protocols, right? So if it is using an HTTP protocol, then it is possible that the communication will be mediated by your web server, and maybe it will be in the web server log, but it is not necessarily in the web server log, because you can actually have application level protocol that has been specifically designed to communicate with the command and control server. It could be a DNS, it could be some other direct TCP connection, and all kinds of stuff. So network intrusion detection is probably your best bet to actually check whether command and control is happening. If you are going to do host intrusion detection in every host, then there is a likelihood that you will also see it in the collected logs of all hosts intrusion information at the host intrusion detection manager, right? But your best bet is certainly a network intrusion detection. So you monitor all the network traffic, and you know, whenever you see an IP address you don't recognize, you automatically look it up from an abuse IP database. So that way you can actually, or URL, you might have certain algorithms for figuring out the URL is suspicious. So network intrusion detection is probably most likely place where you will find this. So when I say persistence, what kind of things you think about? Oh, I think I have a deja vu. We already asked this question before. Yeah, so more or less it gives some of this thing. Persistence is about ensuring that the executable stays irrespective of you know, reboot cycles, and most of the time persistence is done through writing the executable inside your startup folder, or you know, inject itself into a known process which is always running. So this kind of stuff, or you know, changing a registry entry for auto run. So there are several ways to do persistence. So that's something. The reason why I am asking this is that see, what happens is that when you are taking a cybersecurity course, the goal of a cybersecurity course is to actually transform the person, right? The person who was not worried about things that could happen to their phones and their desktops or their servers or their network, their home Wi-Fi, they start thinking about those things, right? So the idea is to make you a little ultra aware of possible threats, right? So the word persistence in general might mean many things, right? So persistence, that's why some people wrote that Virat, because he got a lot of zeros and then he comes back, or whatever you may want to think. I don't like him, so I don't know about his persistence, but in any case, in real life, persistence would mean somebody who is not easily, you know, stopped, right? Like remains persistent, right? It happens when we give grades and then people come and be very persistent that they need a higher grade, right? So that is a real world use of persistent. But as cybersecurity professional, your view of persistence would usually mean you know, something to do with you know, unwanted executables making itself persistent onto the system, so that it remains there. Sometimes it also evades defense, so it may turn out antivirus. It may actually hide itself inside a DLL or some executable by injecting itself inside executable. So there are many ways that this kind of persistence is made by unwanted executables, but the idea is that the most nation state attackers, their goal is not to make a spectacular attack like the Russians did in case of power cut in Ukraine, right? So that kind of attack usually becomes spectacular, but it is immediately understood that there has been an attack, and people will start removing all the malware and block all the IPs and do their best to actually stop that from happening again. The nation state attackers don't do that very often. They usually would do that if there is a war or something, but in general they want to remain persistent. So you will find that most critical infrastructure in India probably have persistent executables from various countries, and unless they actually find these things properly, like our seaports or our power system operators or telecom operators and so on, if they are not doing their cybersecurity properly, they are probably having this persistent agents who are very, very stealthy. They communicate to their command and control very obscurely through very obscure protocols, and if there is no network monitoring, if there is no endpoint monitoring, etc., most people wouldn't know that this is happening. And if this is happening, the reason is that at some point the command and control will ask the agents that are sitting in various places to actually do some action, right? So that's the whole idea, that to position yourself so that you can actually execute a command or series of commands at the time when it is required, and usually this will be required when there is a real conflict, real war, like Ukraine and Russia, or what is happening between Hamas and Israel, things like that. That's the time when these things happen. So and you might have read that the Iranian gas stations were attacked in large number recently, and that were probably by Israel, and because Iranians are giving implicit support to their opponents, so they actually had probably agents sitting in those facilities, and they basically executed some commands. So this is the idea of persistence. So if you are a cybersecurity professional, you have to think in those terms rather than in terms of regular everyday meaning of persistence. Now the last question, what comes to your mind when you hear resource development? Now this is interesting. Andhra Pradesh, fancy defense. Oh, somebody has given a very nice answer, adding resources. Hire experts. Okay, so this one is everybody seems to be spectacularly wrong, right? So remember, nobody has gone back and went to the ATT&CK website, I think, right? So what is happening is that in CKC, when we discussed cyber kill chain, we said that there are 7 stages. First stage was reconnaissance. Second stage was weaponization, right? Now in ATT&CK, if we look at 12 tactics that starts from initial access, it basically says what happens after initial access, right? Initial access, then execution, then persistence, and privilege escalation, and so on, right? But I said several times that there are 2 more before them, right? One is same as CKC, reconnaissance, And second one is same as weaponization, but they call it resource development, right. So the attacker, once it does reconnaissance, it figures out that this is the weak spot which I have to attack through, right. It could be a weak employee who doesn't know about phishing email, or it could be a web server that is that has vulnerability, or it could be another service that is running on a particular port, and we figured out that it is running an unpatched version, and therefore it has a remote code execution, so I am going to use it. But to do all this, I have to develop an exploit, right. To do a phishing, I have to write an email which looks believable, and then I also have to either create a link which will take him to a malware infested website, or I have to actually attach a malware infested Word file or JPEG file and so on. So this whole process of creating these resources which we'll use for attacking doing the initial access, what is called resource development, or in case you are going to exploit internet facing service, you have to design the payload, you have to design the exploit, right. So all these things are, in CKC we call weaponization, in here we are calling it resource development, right. That's a terminology difference. So the right answer here would have been weaponization, right, but you are still thinking from the defender's point of view. So all these answers here is actually from a defender's point of view. The defender is doing hardening, defender is doing sustenance, defender is creating reliability, defender is upgrading the system, taking backups. So you are thinking in terms of defender. But ATT&CK is about the offender, right. So the person who is attacking them, we are trying to understand what all he does. So we have to accordingly fill our mind from an attacker's perspective, right. So that's why most cybersecurity professionals are in some sense schizophrenic. They have to always think in terms of attacker, and then they have to think how I can defend against that attack, right. If you cannot imagine what the attacker would do, then you cannot defend yourself, right. So that's the basic idea. Okay, so that's about these questions. Now I want to, before I go into the raw data aspects, I want to just go back and see where we left off. So we actually did we actually figured out the verbs in the report, then we tried to figure out the behavior. We did research the behavior from ATT&CK website and maybe other resources on the internet or books or whatever your preference. Then we assign to each behavior what tactic it might be, and if I figure out the tactic well, then I can also try to figure out what technique is being used. And then I have a whole mapping of the tactics and techniques. Now the question is that what this is going to, so then we said that there is an exercise here which is called the Cobalt Kitty report, and you can go to this place. So let me show you where it is. So here if you go to this ATT&CK training, and if you go to this mapping from finished reporting. So this is the Cobalt Kitty report, right, and this is a highlights only version of the report, which basically has all the highlights, but you have to go through this to figure out what tactics and what techniques is this. So here you do not have to like say, okay, what am I looking for? Am I looking for the verbs and all that stuff? This report is already pre-filled with the places where you need to find the tactics and techniques, right. So this is the one version. So this will help you to go through this in a much faster manner than if you have to actually go through the entire report by yourself and figure out where the behaviors fragments are and what to do with this behavior and so on. And this report already has a lot of things that are already explained in terms of the things that you want to find. For example, here is a section called C2 communication. So you can figure out that most of the things tactics here would be about C2C command and control communication, right? It might probably have the internal reconnaissance, right? Now, what is internal reconnaissance? So from the Lockheed Martin kill chain, you might get an idea that reconnaissance happens first, then once you find where to attack, you do the weaponization. Once you do that, you come inside and you do initial access, etc., right? But many times, once the malware is inside, it will again scan. It has the code for scanning. It will scan the network and figure out which network is running what open ports, internal open ports, and so on, right? So there could be reconnaissance again, right? And that is the reason why ATT&CK is not a sequence like CKC. CKC is a sequence. ATT&CK is a set of tactics which can happen multiple times in a kill chain, in an attack analysis, right? So internal reconnaissance that's talking about. So this will give you also additional hints as to what are the different tactics and techniques could be, because the headings, the lateral movement, right? So it is already telling you that here we are discussing how the malware moved laterally. They use this mimikatz to, they do probably they do credential dumping, right? So these are the kind of things that happened here, right? But the point is that if you do this at home, you will get some understanding of how this is done, right? Now there is another version here. Let me go back. There is another version of the same thing, which is called tactic hints. So it's the same document, but now the tactics are already given. You have to just find the techniques. So you might actually first try the one without any hints, only highlights. Then you try with if you do well in that, then you are already have gotten a good understanding. If you do not, then you actually use the one with the tactic hints already there, right? So and then you try these, and then and here are the answers. Do not look at the answers. See here all this, not only the tactic but the techniques are also listed. So this is the answer for this one. Now you can also look at the original report. So if you want to take a challenge, you do not use either the highlights or the hints or tactic hints, and do not look at the answers, and try this on the raw report. If you can do it on the raw report and then you go and match it against what is the answer key, then you will probably feel much more comfortable that you can do this in the exam or in the homework, right? So that is the reason why I want you to do this. It's not a formal homework, but if you do not do this right now, you will have a problem later, because you will have to do this in homework. Some fragments of this could be in the exam, and then if you try to learn this in the these things require time, right? These things do not happen like I just go and somebody might be very good at this thing, somebody might have to do a little bit struggle, look up the website to figure out what techniques are there for each tactic, for the tactics that they identify. So it might take some time, but eventually if you try hard, you will get there, right? Now, so that is something I wanted you to do, and if you look at this, the Cobalt Kitty report, once you do that and you have now your groups, And this inside the group you do this and then you discuss and see what are the differences. In terms of groups, somebody came to me and said, we want to have my wingmates in the group, and I have intentionally asked students to not choose the groups, because what happens in group projects is that students, like if there are 3 people, 1 or 2 will work, the other guy will be a freeloader. But if they are wingmates, they will never say that this guy is a freeloader. But if they don't know the guy very well, they will come and tell us that this guy is a freeloader, and then we'll, you know, differentiate between them, right? So this is done intentionally. So you might, the other thing is that, you know, when you go out in the real world, you will not find your wingmates in your projects, right? It's highly unlikely. You have to learn to diversify and work with people who you know only professionally, right? These are some of the things. Now, so comparison wise, so you will, you know, if you do it from the hinted report, then it is unlikely that you will be very different, right? Because you are actually filling in the same boxes. If you do it from the raw report, it might, two of you might have a very different sets of things. Not necessarily, you know, either of you are wrong. You might be mistaken about something, or you might have missed some behavior. That can happen. So, but it is worth a try. And if you do not try and do it first time in the exam, it's unlikely that you will do very well. Now, in the Cobalt-Kitty report, there are actually, I would say, how many? So 22 techniques have been used, right? At least according to their analysis. So 22 techniques you have to identify from that report, and if you do that, you will be in better shape. So you can also, there in that same place, in the same website, you have more such reports. And in the next homework, what we will do is that we will give you 31 reports. Each group has 1 report, and each group has to do the mapping, and there will be no highlights or hints, right? And our TAs are pretty ruthless, so you better do work on that. So I think I have given enough hints about the next homework. Now let's go to the next sub module, which is mapping ATT&CK from raw data. If you are a threat intel analyst in a company, it is likely that nobody is going to give you a finished report when an incident happens, right? When an incident happens, you do forensics. You go and look at various places, like you look at the logs, you look at the network packet trace at the time when incident happened, you look at firewall logs, you look at web server log, you look at look for newly created binaries at the endpoints and so on, and you collect them. And then you are asked to do a root cause analysis, and then you have to actually explain it in terms of ATT&CK. The reason why now you might ask me that well, then why are you teaching us about how to map it from finished report? Because in my job I may not get a finished report because I am the one who will actually do the finished report, right? So how can I get a finished report? So the reason is that you do not become a threat intel analyst overnight, right? You have to understand what the attackers do. Now, when you read that in theory that there are like all these 14 tactics, there are these techniques and so on, that is one thing. And actually reading a good threat intel report from FireEye, Mandiant, Microsoft, etc., is another thing, right? So they do a very thorough analysis. Now, you know that eventually you have to do the ATT&CK mapping from your raw data, but by doing this conversion, you actually can get a lot of learning about how this tactics and techniques are used for attacks. But there is another reason. So if you have thousands of this kind of reports and you want to create a database of tactics and techniques used by various APT groups. Now why do I want to create such a database? What good is such a database? So I have like let's say I take 20 attacks from APT 28 and I map them to tactics, techniques and procedures. I take 15 attacks from APT 3, I map them. So I have a database, APT groups, what attacks they used and in what manner, like in what sequence and so on, so forth, right? So what comes to your mind? What can I do with such a data? Such data? So I can actually try to learn with machine learning, right? How to distinguish between various attack groups, right? Because eventually I want to know whether the attack that I just had is from a nation state attacker or some hobby hacker. Second thing I want to know is that if it is a nation state hacker, which one it is, right? So to do that, this process is called attribution, APT attribution. So you want to know which APT it is. So I may want to create this database, and that database can be used for learning this. So one of my PhD student has done this, right? So and what is the accuracy we are getting? Yeah. So in her work, she also used natural language processing to actually use these reports to extract the mapping automatically. So you do not have to do it, by manually reading everything. Does it work for all reports? Yeah. So these are the kind of things that are happening. But in any case, coming back to the raw data. So most of the time you will be facing raw data. Now this data is requires you to understand some technology commands and so on, right? So you need a much more knowledge and expertise to interpret the raw data as behavior than finished reports. So you will see what you are given are what kind of shell commands have been used, what kind of malware has been used, what kind of they might give you a forensic disk image and you have to use a forensic analysis tool to reconstruct what happened before what. You might get some packet information and so on. So process of mapping here is you have to understand of course ATT&CK. Now from whatever you are given or whatever your forensic people gave you, you find a behavior, then again you have to research the behavior, then you have to translate the behavior into tactic and then figure out what technique happened and compare your results with the other analysts like before. So here is an example of what the forensic people found after an attack. So they found that the attacker used these commands. So first he uses an ipconfig command, then he uses sc command in Windows. Then he found that there are some two-way interaction between an external IP address and internal IP address like 10.2.1344 and whatever this 128.29.32.4, And in this machine, like 128 to 29, you are accessing the port 443. 443 is a port for HTTPS protocol, right? And then you see that in the registry keys in Windows, when you take a registry dump, you find that that there is some new entries in the registry. So these are the things that are given to you by, you are a threat intel analyst and the forensic guy is giving you information. This may not be all the information, we are just showing a fragment of what is given to you, just to show you the kind of work you have to do to interpret this. So ipconfig you all know, right? You want to look at the MAC addresses and IP addresses, all this information, but this is somebody who is doing it inside, right? Not out from outside. You cannot do it from outside. So you're already inside the system, inside the network, and you have as malware or remote shell. It might be a remote shell or it might be a malware. Somebody is doing ipconfig to figure out the various interfaces, network interfaces. SC is a command for creating services, service create command in Windows, and you can also query and other stuff, but in the what we saw there, it was trying to create a service. In the command that we saw, it was trying to create service. So we have to now figure out what service it was trying to create, but we'll get there. But SC is the command. Now, as a threat intel analyst, you have to know this, right? Or you have to research what is SC command for, right? So here is how the SC command is used. You have to basically say a particular computer name. Then you have to do create. Then you have to say which binary has to run, right? When you create the service. So it will tell you, like if you try like SC your computer name and create, then it will ask you like you haven't completed. You have to give me the binary path and things like that. Right. So the analyst is now, as a threat analyst, you actually have to get a little bit of expertise on many things like network, interpret network packet traces, some forensics, something about what malwares are all about, how they work and things like that, how to analyze a malware, command line, what are the different command line commands in command line executables in Windows or whatever the machine is. It may actually have multiple data sources from which it has to figure out. So the first thing is that if you do not know what ipconfig all is, or you want to see whether there is a tactic related to this command, you go to ATT&CK and search ipconfig for all, and you are getting this system network configuration discovery, right? So this is the technique that is coming up, and it is also showing you examples of various attack groups that have used this kind of a command. So they are trying to discover the network configuration of the system on which they are there. Why do they want to know the system configuration? Because they want to know which interfaces are connected to, let's say, WLAN or some other wired LAN or Wi-Fi LAN, and they might want to use it for doing lateral movement, etc. So here the next thing that we saw is that in the SC command, they gave a binary, a path to a binary. This is recycler.exe, and then it is saying that for this command, here are the flags and here are the inputs. There are some input directory or input files, and there is something called they are talking about a VSDX file. So you are confused, right? Recycler is supposed to be a benign program, right? So why would they want to create a recycler service if you are malicious? So you actually say, okay, let's see if this recycler exe binary is already in this machine, the compromised machine, and you run it. When you run it, you see that it is not the recycler, it's a renamed executable. It is actually the rar binary, right? RAR is for compression and encryption of files, right? So somebody, for defense evasion, somebody has renamed this executable to avoid suspicion, right? So you figure out that based on the analysis, now we can Google the flags for RAR, not for recycler. These flags are for the RAR, and determine that that it is being used to compress and encrypt the file. So whatever is this input file here, this is being compressed and encrypted. Okay, so we figure out, now we figure out what is this file, and then you do a Google search, and you find that VSDX is actually a VCO, Microsoft VCO file. But doesn't mean that it has to be a VCO. You can rename any file with any kind of suffix, right? It's just that when you try to load that in VCO, you might get an error that this is not according to format. You can take an executable file and call it PDF, right? So it's obvious. So what we find is, from this, we are figuring out that a file is being compressed and encrypted, and it might be a VCO diagram, but it is probably, in the name of a VCO, it is probably exfiltrating some data. When do you compress and encrypt files? You want to do something with the file, right? I mean, you are not just trying to encrypt and compress, unless you are a ransomware attacker. In that case, you will encrypt everything, right? But here they are encrypting and compressing one file, which means this file probably has some intelligence, some information that they want to send to command and control server, and compression is required because you want to flow below the radar. If you start sending gigabytes of files, somebody will notice, right? Some firewall alarm will go off, or some intrusion detection will go off. But if it is a small few kilobytes or small low megabytes file, it can go like a regular email and everything, right? So nobody will get suspicious. It will not be considered an anomaly. So we find that through ipconfig, what they were trying to do is system network configuration discovery. So this is in the discovery tactic. So one of the tactics out of the 14 tactics is called discovery, because most attacker, when they first make their foothold in the system in one of the devices, they try to figure out, they do internal reconnaissance or something to figure out where I am, what is the structure, what is this machine connected to, and figure out whether I am actually running as root. All this stuff is about discovery, right? So one tactic here is discovery, and also it is being run, therefore it is also execution, right? Although this is a benign binary, ipconfig is a benign program, but at least it is being executed on behalf of a malicious actor. So it's a part of an attack tactic, so it will also fall under execution. Now here we found that in this larger SC service create command, we figured out that VSDX is VCO. So moderate confidence that this is exfiltration, because we are trying to compress and encrypt the file, it is likely to be compression, likely to be exfiltration, and then it is being seen to run by a sysmon, which is basically execution, right? So this is how we are mapping the tactics. So here you see that we are actually going more from technique to tactic rather than tactic. In the other one we went from tactic to technique. Here, since we are looking at the commands, it's likely that we'll find the technique first and then we'll find the tactic. Okay, so we have, it's time, so we'll get it, from here in the next class because this will take some time about discussing about the techniques and concurrent techniques and so on, but you start getting the idea, right? So I think you should by now have a good idea about how to do this from finished reports, and you are starting to get some idea about how to do it in with raw data. So by the time we are here next week, will actually do more on the raw data. Okay.